Welcome. We are reconvening from closed session. In closed session, the board discussed or took action on the following legal matters: Mirabelli versus Olson. And we have the public comment slide up for our waiver discussion. I'd like to take up the waiver consent items W1 through W11. We'll now open the phone line for the public comment queue. And the slide is displayed, and we'll take a moment to see if there's any public comment coming in.
If there's any public comment in the room, please line up at the microphone.
Okay, we've given a little wait time, so hearing no, there's nobody on the phone?
No, there's no callers in the queue.
Okay, wonderful. Since there's no further public comment, I'll ask for a motion on consent waivers 1 through 11. May I have a motion? Thank you. Vice President Glover Woods, do I have a second? Member Olkin? For all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? What are you doing over there? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 11 is the consideration of requests for determination of funding with reasonable basis, mitigating circumstances as required for non-classroom-based charter schools pursuant to California Education Code sections 47612.5 and 47634.2 and Associated California Code of Regulations, Title V. The CDE recommends that we take the following actions on the charter schools mitigating circumstances requests and determination of funding requests. Approve the mitigating circumstances requests and determination of funding requests at 100% for 20 charter schools, as you can see in attachment 1. Approve the mitigating circumstances requests and determination of funding requests at 85% for 7 charter schools, as specified in attachment 1, and deny the mitigating circumstances requests and approve the determination of funding requests at the level for which they are qualified based on their reported expenditures for 7 charter schools, as shown in attachment 1. And the item will be presented by Stephanie Farland and McKenna Huey of the CDE. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. This item, as Board President Linda Darling-Hammond just stated, includes a consideration of determination of funding requests with mitigating circumstances for 34 charter schools. The schools presented in this item do not meet the regulatory requirements to qualify for 100% funding for their non-classroom-based instruction based on reported expenditures and the criteria outlined in California Code of Regulations, Title V. 17 of these schools qualify for 85% funding, 13 qualify for 70%, and 4 qualify for 0%. And just as an aside, you, on consent, approved all of the other funding determination requests. We had almost 200 come in at one time, so this was a huge lift for our staff to do at once. It doesn't normally work out that way. Our recommendation today is the California Department of Education recommends that the state board take the following actions: approve 20 charter schools funding determination at 100%, approve 7 at 85%, and approve 7 charter schools funding determinations at the level of funding for which they qualify to receive. At its April 18th, 2023 meeting, the Advisory Commission on Charter Schools moved to recommend that the SBE approve all schools funding determinations at 100% for 2 years. That motion passed by a vote of 6-2. And then to give you the background and go over the item in more detail, I pass it off to McKenna Huey.
All right. Good morning, President Darling-Hammond, Vice President Glover Woods, and members of the State Board. As Stephanie Farland just said, my name is McKenna Huey, and I'm a manager in the Charter Schools Division. I'm going to provide a little bit of background about the funding determination process. So, pursuant to California Education Code, Section 47612.5, a charter school may receive funding for its non-classroom-based instruction only if a determination of funding is made by the State Board. If a charter school's total average daily attendance is less than 80% classroom-based, it must obtain a determination of funding from the board in order to receive funding for its non-classroom-based instruction. So Senate Bill 820, which was signed by the governor in September of 2020, made changes to the funding determination process for fiscal years 2020-21 through 2021-22. And this impacted charter schools that had an active funding determination that expired on June 30th of 2021 and 2022. So specifically, this bill extended the deadline for non-classroom-based charter schools to submit a funding determination renewal request from February 1st to June 30th. Pursuant to this bill, non-classroom-based charter schools that submitted a complete funding determination request by the June 30th deadline received their current level of funding for 2 years. And these funding determination requests did not require approval from the state board. So the department worked very closely with those charter schools who were impacted by Senate Bill 820 to ensure that all charter schools submitted a complete funding determination request by the deadline. So for both fiscal years, all schools who were required to submit by June 30th submitted by that date and therefore received their current level of funding for 2 additional years. Due to the impact of this bill on the funding determination process, for the last couple of fiscal years, the Advisory Commission on Charter Schools, as well as the State Board, have heard significantly fewer funding determination requests than in previous years. However, as this bill does not apply for fiscal years 2022, 23, and beyond, the department anticipates that the State Board will return to hearing a large volume of funding determination requests, particularly at the May meeting. And as Stephanie Farland just said, we had over 200 or close to 200 requests that we processed this year. So as stated in this item, Education Code Section 47634.3 provides that regulations shall specify that non-classroom-based instruction is conducted for the instructional benefit of pupils and is substantially dedicated to that function. So in determining the amount of funding to be allocated to a charter school for its non-classroom-based instruction, the State Board shall consider, among other factors it deems appropriate, the amount of the charter school's total budget expended on certificate employee salaries and benefits and on school sites, as well as the teacher-to-pupil ratio of the school. This section also states that for the 2003-2004 fiscal year and each fiscal year thereafter, the amount of funding determined by the State Board shall be no more than 70% of the unadjusted amount to which a charter school would otherwise be entitled, unless the State Board determines that a greater or lesser amount is appropriate based on the criteria outlined in Education Code. So regulations specify and outline the eligibility requirements for specific levels of funding for charter schools offering non-classroom-based instruction. So as illustrated on the table on this slide, the requirements to qualify for a recommendation for 100% funding for non-classroom-based instruction is charter schools spending 40% of their public revenues on certificated salaries and benefits, 80% of their total revenues on instruction and related services, and maintain a pupil-to-teacher ratio of 25:1. For charter schools that do not meet the requirements and criteria for their requested level of funding, regulation states that a reasonable basis, also referred to as a mitigating circumstance, by which to make an other recommendation in order to allow a non-classroom-based charter school to receive a higher percentage of funding than it qualifies for based on its expenditures may be found. So getting into the actual item now, as previously stated, this item considers determination of funding requests for 34 charter schools. All of these charter schools fail to meet the requirements to qualify for 100% funding for their non-classroom-based instruction. When considering mitigating circumstances, the department is guided by regulations, section 11963.4E, and considers the unique or exceptional circumstances of the charter school. This section of regulations provides specific instances for which mitigating circumstances may be considered, which include, but are not limited to, information provided by the school on its funding determination form, documented data regarding individual circumstances of the charter school, the size of the charter school, and the number of years a charter school has been in operation. This section also states that serious consideration of full funding shall be given to charter schools with less than a total of 100 units of prior year second period average daily attendance and charter schools that are in their first year of operation. California Code of Regulations, Title V, Section 11963.4b, permits the department to ask charter schools for additional information in order to make possible a more detailed review or to develop a reasonable basis for a recommendation other than those prescribed by regulations. Pursuant to this section, the department requests and considers additional information of charter schools, which may include, but again is not limited to, charter schools' excess reserves, as well as their previous requests for the consideration of mitigating circumstances. With specific regard to a charter school's excess reserves, regulations state that reserves in excess of the greater of $50,000 or 5% of total expenditures may be allowed for economic uncertainties or long-term expenditures such as capital projects if the excess reserves are satisfactorily explained. Pursuant to this section, during the consideration of requests for mitigating circumstances, the department does ask for additional information of charter schools' excess reserves. And the department's review and consideration of that additional information is limited to what is provided by the charter schools. Pursuant to regulations, the funding period for an existing non-classroom-based charter school shall be for a minimum of 2 years and a maximum of 5 years in length. As outlined in statute, 5-year periods are dependent on a charter school's academic performance index rate. However, because API is no longer calculated, the department does not currently recommend 5-year periods. For charter schools requesting the consideration of mitigating circumstances, it is the department's practice to recommend funding periods of 2 years, and this allows the department to timely revisit schools' funding determinations and ensure that they are meeting the requirements outlined in regulations for their approved level of funding. Schools whose funding determinations are approved at a level different than what is requested may submit a funding determination reconsideration request pursuant to regulations. And pursuant to this section, a school that wishes to seek a higher or lower determination of funding shall do so by filing a new determination of funding request during the effective period of their funding determination. And if approved by the state board, that would replace their funding determination that is then in effect. Based on its review of the charter school's reported expenditures and in alignment with the requirements outlined in regulations, the department recommends that the state board approve 20 schools' funding determination requests at 100%, which is a higher level of funding than for which they qualify, approve 7 charter schools' funding determination requests at 85%, which again is a higher level of funding than for which they qualify, approve 7 charter schools' funding determinations at the level of funding for which they qualify to receive based on their expenditures and regulations. And to clarify, the department is not proposing that these schools have their fundings cut or that these schools receive no funding for their non-classroom-based instruction. Rather, the department is recommending that the state board approve these schools' funding determinations at the level for which they qualify to receive pursuant to regulations. Thank you for your consideration of this item. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So at this point, I want to ask our liaisons, Vice President Glover Woods and Member Olken, if they have any initial comments while we're putting up the public comment slide. Could you go ahead and put that up? Great. So if there are comments to be called in, please use the number and the participant access code on this slide. Vice President Glover Woods, will you start us off?
I'm actually going to have Member Olken start us off, and I will follow her if that is okay.
Sure.
Thank you. So first, I just want to point out that you both mentioned the incredible amount of information you had to review for this item, and having tried to keep up with it myself, I just want to thank you for how much you looked at and reviewed. It was an incredible volume of information. And as the course of this, between ACCS and now, there's been new information that's been presented, and they kept going back, so I just want to thank you for that too. And then just for us, what you heard was that we are considering two different recommendations. There's the recommendation coming from the department, which is outlined in the item, and then at the advisory commission on charter schools, there was a different recommendation, which is also outlined in the slides. And there was quite a bit of discussion about this item because the mitigating circumstances are basically related to arguments about pandemic effect and one-time funding and how that plays out for schools as they're trying to determine their budget. So it really was a meaty conversation, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about it in public comment. So, and I'll save the rest for later. Thank you.
And I will just add to Member Olken's comments by stating what we just saw in the conclusion and recommendation chart, just again to reemphasize that this item is not bringing forward no funding. All of the charter schools what is being recommended is that they either receive the funding determination at the level for which they are qualified to receive or above that particular level. And so I just want to underscore that, as well as underscoring there is opportunity, as was shared in one of our previous slides, for any school that receives a funding determination at a level that they are that they qualify for, but they feel they should receive more. They do have opportunity to come back and request an additional consideration for additional funding. So again, just wanted to underscore those 2 points as we get ready to go into public comment.
So I guess we wanted to see first if there's any public comment in the room.
Will the following individuals please line up at the microphone? Cynthia Rachel, Nicholas Watson, Heidi Gaska, Joe Serrera, Eric Premack, Jeff Rice, and Bill Dobson.
I think you can go ahead. Please state your name and affiliation for the record. Please be sure the microphone is on.
Is it better now?
Better. Yeah,
Great.
thank you.
My name is Cynthia Rachel, and I'm representing South Sutter and Sky Mountain Charter Schools. Our schools have a track record of clean audits, fiscal solvency, and 100% funding determinations for more than 15 years. I'm concerned that the recommendations made by the ACCS are not the ones that were presented as the formal recommendation for your review today. There are now new recommendations that are not following the regulatory process outlined by SB 740. This discrepancy has caused significant distress to our schools, as well as all mentioned in item 11. We were encouraged by ACCS's recognition of the one-time unique and exceptional circumstances that all schools in California have faced over the past 3 years, which prevented us from meeting the usual funding thresholds. The ACCS's recommendation offers a fair and just solution for our schools considering these exceptional circumstances. Please support the ACCS's recommendation. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Heidi Gaska. I'm the Executive Director for Excel Academy Charter School. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the extraordinary one-time circumstances brought about by the COVID pandemic. The tremendous uncertainty and fear and doubt was not a time conducive to make hasty decisions in regards to budgeting. As a steward of public funds, I was committed to be prudent in the budgeting process. In fact, the timing of the required SB 740 filing artificially inflated our reserves, and the reality is we did not have access to the necessary funds during the course of the 21-22 school year. Excel Academy fell above the 40% and just 3% below the 80% target. I want to make sure that you're aware that Excel Academy was just one of 11 non-classroom-based charter schools that was named a 2023 California Distinguished School. In fact, we were the only school to be given this honor in the entire high desert. We would like to continue to educate students who attend one of the top 356 schools in California, acknowledged for closing the achievement gap and achieving exceptional student performance.
Good morning, Board President Dr. Darling Hammond and board members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Joe Serrera from Excel Academy Charter School, one of the distinguished schools selected in 2023. The COVID-19 pandemic has posed significant challenges for our school this year and the last 2 years. In the last fiscal year, we faced financial difficulties due to unforeseen events because of the influx of students that chose our schools. But we couldn't claim funding for those because of SB 579. We also received $290,000 in PPP program, which later forgiven, which impacted our SB 740 calculation and artificially inflated our reserve. So in conclusion, I express my sincerest gratitude for the opportunity to address the State Board of Education and shed light on our circumstances. I strongly urge the State Board of Education to accept the recommendation from ACCCS and approve 100% funding for Excel Academy Charter School. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Bill Dobson, and I'm the director at Motivated Youth Academy. Motivated Youth Academy has an enrollment of 251 students and has been a dashboard alternative school status community of practice since July 2019. Our school is one of only 3 DOS schools in our service area that is primarily virtual, meaning students get the benefit of both in-person support from a credentialed teacher as well as the flexibility of virtual program offers. Our teachers go into the communities where students live and meet with them weekly at public locations such as libraries, community centers, and tribal halls. Our focus is on creating equitable access to consistently strong outcomes for all students, paying special attention to the social-emotional needs of historically marginalized populations. I urge you to recommend 100% full funding for Motivated Youth Academy so the at-promise and opportunity youth we serve continue to have equitable access to public education and the opportunity to earn a high school diploma. Thank you.
Morning, members of the board. Nicholas Watson speaking on behalf of the California Charter Schools Association. I just wanted to thank CD staff. I know that it took a tremendous amount of work to review all these materials. And then we just wanted to say we support full funding determinations for all these schools consistent with the ACCS recommendation. Thank you.
Good morning, Jeff Rice with the A+ Personalized Learning Network Association. I want to commend the ACCS's wisdom and compassion in recommending 100% funding for 2 years for all 34 charter schools having to rely on mitigating circumstances, and urge you to approve the ACCS recommendation as well to allow these schools time to return to normal post-pandemic operations without undermining their funding stability. It is critically important to recognize and acknowledge the COVID pandemic as the most extreme and extraordinary mitigating circumstance in our lifetime as ample justification to grant all these schools 100% funding for 2 years. Fiscal year 21-22 is the first year coming out of the eye of the pandemic storm, was dominated by continuing fear, uncertainty, and doubt about a very unclear future, not to mention extreme challenges around teacher shortages, chronic student absences, mental health issues, and more, all beyond the control of any school administration. It was not a climate conducive to a return to normal operations yet, nor to engage in major spending commitments, but instead required prudent and responsible measures internally to ensure higher than normal reserves to maintain stability. I urge you to approve the recommendation of the ACCS. Thank you.
Good morning, Eric Premack with the Charter Schools Development Center here in support of the ACCS recommendation for full funding. The law here is poorly drafted and folks can read it in different ways. I was a party to the negotiations roughly 20 years ago that led to the creation of this law. And we had long discussions with the governor at the time, Gray Davis, and he shared some of our concerns about the law, and when he signed it, he wrote a signing message that went along with it, and you can download it from his archives. And he said, because I have some concern that this bill could be administered in an overly broad fashion, I'm requesting the State Board of Education to regulate and administer the provisions of this act in a manner to affect only those charter schools which spend excessively on administration and profit. None of the schools before you today do we have evidence of excessive spending on administration nor profit. All of them have submitted perfectly valid reasons for mitigation, standard practices that all school districts and charter schools routinely engage in, and I hope that you will support the ACCS recommendation. Thank you.
And we do not have any callers in the queue, so that concludes public comment for item number 11.
Okay, at this point, I think we're open for board discussion and questions. So let's kick that off. I do have a question, which is, and maybe our liaisons can help, and or our CDE colleague can help. Can you articulate for me why the ACCS recommendations were not adopted? Why don't you start us off with that?
Sorry, to clarify, you're asking why the CDE did not adopt the ACCS's recommendation?
Yeah.
The CDE, just upon its analysis of all of the school's funding determination requests and mitigating circumstances, we feel that our recommendation is appropriate and what the schools qualify for. We did take mitigating circumstances into consideration, and as you'll see in the item and in our analysis, we do acknowledge that. There were other considerations, though, that led us to recommend other levels of funding that they would receive, so 85% or 70%.
So then I want to know what the other considerations were that would sort of push aside the mitigating circumstances.
Right, and those were also outlined in the item. A lot of the things that the other things that we considered were the charter school's reserves. Regulations does state that a charter school may have more than 5% in reserves if they are satisfactorily explained. We did ask for more information of those charter schools who had very large reserves, and as you'll see, they ranged anywhere from 20% to 80% to 100% of their total expenditures. And so we did ask for that information. If we felt that their responses were not satisfactory, again, we made our recommendation as we felt was appropriate.
Yes, Vice President Glover Woods?
I just had a follow-up question. As it relates to one-time funding that has been received, and how was that taken into consideration with reserves and with the impact it would have on the percentages that are required?
Absolutely, and that is something that we considered as well. A part of our recommendations we came to our recommendations because if we excluded those one-time funds from the school's calculations, they still would not meet the requirements to qualify for a recommendation of 100% funding. So in cases where those one-time funds did impact their ability to meet or qualify for meet those requirements, again, we did find that to be a mitigating circumstance. But in situations where had that one-time funding been excluded and they still would have not met the requirements, we made a recommendation as we felt was in alignment with regulations.
I just wanted to provide one more piece of information for your question. There were, and if I get this wrong, please feel free to correct me. There were 2 schools who CDE did change their recommendation for between ACCS and now. So upon further review, they changed their recommendation to full funding. And that was based on more information that came in. And that's correct, right? Excellent. And then my reading of the recommendations for less than full funding was almost, in most cases, it was based on the what schools said their reserves would be used for, and why, or didn't. So that's to try and answer your question. And then can I go on to a comment then? Okay, thanks. And then as I sort of dug into this, what stood out to me was the schools who, I mean, first of all, there were so many schools, and it was a lot because of the gap in doing these funding determinations. And during that gap, that was when we were in the depths of uncertainty related to the pandemic. And that was both about how many students schools had. Some of these schools, their enrollment dropped. Some of these schools, their enrollment actually increased substantially, but because of the hold harmless legislation, they didn't receive increased funding for those students. So they were actually educating more students with the same per pupil funding. It was also the time period in which what schools could expect to see in terms of state funding, whether it was one-time funding, ongoing funding, categorical funding, things, it was really unclear at the time of budget decision-making. And so the position I think these schools are in is their funding going forward is dependent upon their previous year's budget revenue and expenses. And so trying to fit within the sort of funding formula was particularly complicated in this time of great uncertainty. And so I think when the schools requested mitigating circumstances, that's what it was about, right? It was like, this is what, instead of decreasing the amount of per pupil funding we're going to have in the future based on the uncertainty of the last couple of years, they're requesting that their funding stays the same. To me, that's sort of the crux of the issue. And it was also really the crux of the conversation at the ACCS, where the CDE is carefully and conscientiously reviewing information that came in, and the schools are also trying to figure out how to continue to do right by their kids coming out of a really uncertain time.
Any, Vice President Glover Woods?
We're going back and forth here. I just want to, again, shape into context, I believe, what is in front of us in this particular item. And please, again, McKenna, correct me if I'm incorrect. We're looking at our 14 schools that have not, in this particular item, been recommended for 100% funding. And just to underscore the conversation that took place at the ACCS meeting, the commissioners at the meeting, those who voted in the affirmative to go with 100% funding for 2 years, felt that the impact of the pandemic, the impact of one-time funds, the impact of many of these different things that we could have never anticipated has directly impacted the schools and the mitigating circumstances that they have submitted for. So again, just trying to stick with the context of what we're looking at, and we have 14 schools that are being presented before us to be recommended at a level lower than the 100% 2-year full funding, even though they're being recommended at the level of funding for which they qualify. I do have one question as I went into that long dissertation, and I apologize. One question. For the 14 schools that we're considering not 100% funding for the 2 years, are any of those schools, in a sense, going to receive less funding than they previously had because of the mitigating circumstance funding determination they've submitted now?
Sorry, is the microphone working? That is a possibility. I don't have that historical information on me right now, so I can't give you kind of that side by side of all the schools and what they previously had, but that definitely is a possibility. As stated in a previous slide, again, schools can submit a reconsideration request if they receive a different level of funding than for which they qualified for. And I'd also like to go back to something that Member Olken that you stated. So you spoke a lot about the circumstances of COVID and the one-time funding and the pandemic. And just to clarify, the CDE did take those things into consideration. You'll see that in the item as well as in our analysis for each school. There were other factors outside of those circumstances that guided us to our other recommendation that wasn't 100% funding for their non-classroom-based instruction.
I was just going to clarify that there are definitely some schools we heard in public comment who they would receive less. They have received 100% funding previously, and the recommendation is to receive less than 100% currently. So just to answer your question.
Right, are there other questions or comments?
Clarifying question. There's a school that spends more than 100% on certificated staff compensation. How does that happen?
So in terms of calculating a percentage spent on certificated salaries and benefits, that is looked at based on a school's public revenues, and instruction-related services are based on total revenues.
Any other comments or questions? Do I have a motion? Is there more deliberation needed? That's okay.
Just based on something you just said and the question Vice President Glover Woods asked, so some schools may receive less funding and you're funding them at what they qualified for. So the less funding would mean difficulty going forward. Is that what your intent with the concern about the reserves? Your intent is that they use the reserves going forward if they use less funding, or what is the intent there? What is the nexus between the reserves and the lack of lower funding than what they received before, if that makes sense?
I think I understand. So there is no intent to cut these schools' fundings. Again, we are guided by regulations, and based on the expenditures that these schools reported to us, this is what they qualify to receive for their non-classroom-based instruction, again, pursuant to regulations.
Glover Woods.
Okay, so again, just to kind of form context for the motion and for the decision that the board will need to make, we have CDE's recommendation that outlines, as we see on the slide before us, and then the ACCS has, in a sense, recommended that the state board consider providing 100% funding for 2 years for all of the schools in this particular item, as a result of a lot of the different things that have been talked about. So that's what I see as the 2 points before us at right now, and don't know if there's more conversation about those 2 options or how we want to move forward from there.
Member Olken, you were leaning in. You are our liaison, so we rely on you.
I mean, I'm prepared to make a motion, and I guess we can, I mean, the motion I would like to make is that we approve these schools at 100% funding, all of them for 2 years, as recommended by the ACCS.
And do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
What we're weighing and balancing here is the mitigating circumstances and the regulations which were enacted when there weren't mitigating circumstances, and how do we weigh and balance those two things? And we appreciate that it puts the department and everyone else into a very complicated situation. So we have a motion and we have a second. Is there any further discussion of the motion? Yes, Member Yoshimoto Tari?
I just wanted you to clarify the timeline for appeals. Should the current motion on the table not pass, what's the process for appeals?
So a charter school may submit a reconsideration of their funding determination, and they would do that during the period that their funding determination that they want to be reconsidered is in effect. So the current funding determinations are for fiscal year 2023-24. A charter school could submit a reconsideration request anytime during that fiscal year, or really anytime during the period for which their funding determination is adopted.
And maybe I missed this by reviewing the file, but how many of these are alternative schools? I know we had one public speaker from alternative schools.
I do not have that information on hand right now, but I can definitely look that up and get back to you.
I can ask one more clarifying question to follow up on that.
Okay.
Following up on Member Yoshimoto Tari's question, if the motion doesn't pass, and the one that I made, and the schools choose to come back, what they submitted for this funding determination request was based on audited financials. So is it true that they would need to wait another year to have another round of audited financials to submit? And if that's true, is the funding retroactive, suggesting that, or is the funding retroactive? Because if it isn't, then of the 2-year term, the most they could be hoping for is 1 year of full funding. Is that correct?
I believe the funding can be retroactive. Again, during the reconsideration request, schools indicate which periods or the period of times that they want to be reconsidered. So in that regard, if it was for, let's say, a previous fiscal year, I believe their funding would be adjusted retroactively.
And the soonest they could come back would be when they have another year of audited financials to apply with?
Typically, that is the case. There have been circumstances in the past where charter schools have submitted a funding determination request based on unaudited actuals or budget data as well. And again, we do take that into consideration in our review. And if we need additional information, then we ask for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comment, discussion before we vote? All right, seeing none, all in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay? Okay, we have 2 nays. And motion passes. Thank you very much. Do we need to take a break at this point? At this point, we're going to take a 15-minute break and reconvene at 10:20. All right, we're reconvening. We have received Thank you. We've received written notice earlier today from the charter operator of Time Community Charter informing the State Board of Education and the CDE that they're surrendering their charter effective June 5th, 2023. Accordingly, we do not need to proceed with item 13 and are pulling it from the agenda. And I just say that, it was clear when we heard from the charter operator and the families, the children and the parents yesterday that this is not a failure of educational practice. It is a failure of our system to figure out how to fund the educational practice that really helps kids who've been falling through the cracks be supported. So we hope that there will be a way to continue the work to the benefit of kids in the work that goes forward, in whatever way, in whatever district context that may allow for. And with that, we're going to move on now to item 14, which is several pages hence here, public comment. So we're going to take up agenda item 14, which is general public comment. Public comment is invited on any matter that is not included on the printed agenda. So members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so in person or by calling the number that is shown on what will soon be posted as a public comment slide. Very good. Thank you very much. You can call the number on that slide and use the participant access code. We also want to remind folks to turn down their speaker volume if they are following the live feed to avoid an echo. Are there any speakers signed up to provide public comment in person?
Yes, there are two, Steve McDougall and Tim Taylor.
Good morning, members of the board, board president, CD staff. I'm Steve McDougall, and serendipitously, as today, I'm now the president of CFT's Division Council of Early Childhood through Adult Education Locals, and I'm representing the voice of about 50,000 educators throughout the state. And I'm happy to observe you and support you in any way we can as you implement, carry out, and sometimes enforce policy. So I'll be around for a couple years at least. Thank you very much.
Welcome. We have another speaker?
Tim, you up?
You're up.
Hi, Tim Taylor from the California Small School District Association, and good to see you again. And thanks for your service. President and all, I sent you guys an email about from Fresno County Office of Ed in Riverside about the number of plans and templates and due dates that districts are facing. We require between 20 and 29. And on behalf of the small districts, I encourage us to have a task force or something. How do we get these things to be more relevant? Our LCAPs are between 60 and 100 pages. Parents are not reading them. We've developed a 5-page LCAP that meets the statute, and we welcome to work with Brooks and the CDE to let's do some plans that parents will read. And you're overwhelming. We're all overwhelming these superintendents, especially a superintendent principal who's trying just to work and do the school, and we're making them do all these plans. So I encourage you to look at those templates and work with us to make them more efficient and effective.
That all of the in-person comment. So do we have callers on the phone?
We do. We have approximately 10 on the phone right now. I will open up the phone line right now. Good morning, State Board of Education. Please state your name and affiliation for the record. You have 1 minute. Your time starts now.
My name is Jimmy Eggers. I am the superintendent principal of Big Creek Elementary School. I'm calling regarding our LCAP plans. I'm going to try to be very brief. At this point in time, we have approximately 30 students. We can write a more detailed individual education plan for each student in less pages and in less time than it takes us to fill out the paperwork for the standard California State LCAP. The number of plans that I present, I could do in a much shorter, better manner where my parents would understand very well where the money is going, why it's going there, and how it's affecting kids. So I'm just calling to let you guys know that this is a very important piece, that we do need that help. The 5-page plan, if you teamed it with a 10-page strategic plan, would say more to parents and your community than our current LCAP process. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Next caller, ending in the last 4 digits, 1279. You are now live. Please start your public comment.
Hi, I'm Callie. I am a program educator at Girls Inc., and I am here on behalf of our advocacy group that is advocating for student mental health rights on campus. And it came to our attention that California Senate Bill number 14 was amended to include that a pupil shall be excused from school when the absence is due to the benefit of the pupil's mental or behavioral health. And we have realized that schools and districts are not implementing this. Many administrators are not aware of this and have marked people unexcused wrongfully or given inaccurate information. We are asking that the SBE members and the board further discuss this issue and update illness verifications to include mental health as excusable absence. We are also asking that schools ensure that they are enforcing excused mental health days and are requiring education on SB 14 for students. Also update the illness verification regulations to include for the benefit of the pupil's mental health or behavioral health, and ensure schools request no additional requisites, just as any other illness absence. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, ending in the last 4 digits, 6111. You are now live. Please start your public comment.
Hello, I'm Gabriella Maffey, proud to be in my 10th year as superintendent of the award-winning Garden Grove Unified School District. As you've read in my recent correspondence, the state system for both rewards, distinguished schools, and accountability, differentiated assistance, is deeply flawed in respect to the dashboard element of chronic absenteeism. This year, both programs were based on last year's data, and 8 of our schools should have received distinguished schools, but were denied due to chronic absenteeism, based exclusively on COVID-19 absences which were required by the state health order. In respect to distinguished schools, many of our parents will share with you their extreme disappointment in the state for denying their schools this award, as they feel like the state is penalizing them for following the rules instead of rewarding them, as their children still excelled academically, despite the fact that they were required to stay home due to circumstances out of their control. In respect to differentiated assistance, we had 33 schools identified for ATSI, none for CSI, but 21 of those were also solely based on COVID-19 absences from last year. I've submitted detailed written public comments for this meeting on both of these issues, and I have faith that the state will make this right for our students, families, and schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, please state your name and affiliation for the record. You have 1 minute. Your time starts now.
My name is Linda Nguyễn, là một phụ huynh ở trường tiểu học Anthony thuộc khu học chánh của Garden Grove. Phụ huynh Anthony tự hào về trường của chúng tôi. Niên học này chúng tôi đang thi đua tranh giải nơi xanh toàn quốc, và năm trước chúng tôi đã được báo US News and World Report xếp hạng trường thuộc 20% các trường tiểu học ưu hạng trên toàn quốc. Chúng tôi kinh ngạc khi biết trường của chúng tôi đã không đạt danh hiệu trường ưu tú chỉ vì tỷ lệ vắng mặt của COVID-19. Năm ngoái cả 2 con gái tôi đã nghỉ học vì COVID và rơi vào trường học vắng mặt thường xuyên. Tuy nhiên 2 con gái tôi vắng mặt là do quy định của tiểu bang. Evany đạt đủ mọi tiêu chuẩn trong phiếu điểm và Kaylee vượt tiêu chuẩn trong kỳ khảo sát của SPAC của tiểu bang về các môn Anh văn, ELA và toán. Còn chúng tôi bị buộc phải ở nhà và vẫn học rất chăm chỉ để hoàn tất đầy đủ các bài vở của trường. Vậy chăng tiểu bang không tin rằng chúng tôi giữ con của tôi ở nhà vì lý do y tế hay do luật lệ quy định? Xin hãy quyết định đúng và sửa lại sai lầm. My name is Linda Nguyễn. I'm a parent at Anthony Elementary School from Garden Grove Unified School District. Anthony parents.
Thank you.
I think we need to hear the translation.
My name is Linda Nguyễn. I'm a parent at Anthony Elementary School in the Garden Grove Unified School District. Anthony parents take great pride in our school. This year we are running for the National Blue Ribbon, and last year we ranked in the top 20% of our school by US News and World Report. We were shocked that our school did not earn the California Distinguished School Award based only on our COVID-19 absences. My daughter both had COVID absences last year that met the chronic absenteeism criteria. However, our absences for both girls were due to the state-mandated COVID requirements. Despite the absence of focus, stay on top of the schoolwork, and the grades reflect that. Evelyn's report card showed us she met our standard, and Kaylee exceeded standard in both ELA and math on the state aspect test. Our children were required to stay home and still work very hard to stay on top of their schoolwork. Doesn't the state trust us that we only kept our children home when it was medical necessary and required by law? Please do the right thing and correct your error. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, you are now live. Please start your public comment.
Hola, soy Elvia Magaña y soy madre de familia.
Buenas tardes, señora. Buenos días. Soy el intérprete. Va a tener más tiempo el estipulado. Por favor, hable lento y por segmentos. Adelante, por favor.
Hola, soy Elvia Magaña y soy madre de familia de la escuela primaria Hazard en el distrito
Hola, soy
escolar unificado
Elvia
de
Magaña from the primary school. ¿Puede repetir el nombre de la escuela, por favor?
Si quiere, yo puedo leer la traducción en inglés.
Como usted desee, señora.
Okay, I'll read Spanish first and then English. Hola, soy Elvia Magaña y soy madre de familia de la escuela primaria Hazard en el distrito escolar unificado de Garden Grove. Hazard es escuela galardonada. Fue nombrada Escuela Distinguida de California en el 2020 y en el 2022 clasificó en el 20% de las mejores de todas las escuelas primarias por US News and World Report y recibió el premio de oro de PBIS. Nos sorprendió descubrir que la única razón por la que Hazard no recibió el premio de Escuela Distinguida de California este año es por las ausencias de COVID. A mi esposo le dio COVID en agosto de 2021 y mis hijas y yo tuvimos que permanecer en cuarentena por 10 días. Después, en octubre de 2021, Emily tuvo síntomas parecidos al resfriado y se le requirió tomar otra cuarentena de 10 días. En enero de 2022, a mis hijas y a mí nos dio COVID. Una vez más, seguimos los protocolos y trabajamos arduamente para mantener a nuestras hijas al día con el trabajo escolar a pesar de los días perdidos. Nos sorprendió que el Estado sancionara a las escuelas al negarles este reconocimiento cuando el Estado fue quien creó los requisitos de COVID. Hello, my name is Elvia Magaña, and I'm a parent at Hazard Elementary School in the Garden Grove Unified School District. Hazard is an award-winning school. We earned the California Distinguished School Award in 2020, and in 2022, we ranked in the top 20% of all elementary schools by U.S. News and World Report and received the PBIS Gold Award for a positive culture and climate. We were shocked to find out that the only reason we didn't receive the California Distinguished School Award this year is because of our COVID absences. When my husband tested positive for COVID in August 2021, my daughters and I had to quarantine for 10 days. Then, in October 2021, Emily had cold-like symptoms and was required to take another 10-day quarantine. In January 2022, my daughters and I all tested positive for COVID. Once again, we followed the protocols. Our family worked hard to keep up with our daughter's schoolwork despite the missed days. It's surprising to us that the state would punish schools by denying them this honor when the state was the one who created the COVID requirements in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, you are now live. Please start your public comment.
Hola, mi nombre es Jacqueline Andrade. Yo hablo español e inglés, so voy a empezar en español. Una vez más, mi nombre es Jacqueline Andrade y mis dos hijas asisten a la escuela primaria Morningside en el Distrito Escolar Unificado de Garden Grove, una escuela excepcional. Estamos orgullosos de que superamos consistentemente a otras escuelas en las pruebas estatales. Esperábamos ser la escuela distinguida de California de 2023 como en el 2019. Y nos sorprendió mucho que el Estado no nos concedió el premio debido a nuestras ausencias de COVID. Mis hijas se vieron muy afectadas por las reglas impuestas por el Estado durante la pandemia. Mis hijas también se vieron obligadas a quedarse en casa por estar expuestas a una persona con COVID. Mis hijas tuvieron ausencias justificadas por haber estado en contacto con familiares con COVID. Además, perdieron trabajo escolar, instrucciones y a sus amigos. Aún así, ambas continuaron teniendo un desempeño excepcional en sus trabajos escolares, cumpliendo y superando todas las normas del nivel de grado. Once again, my name is Jacqueline. I have two daughters that attend Morningside Elementary in the Garden Grove Unified School District, an outstanding school. We are proud that Morningside consistently outperforms other schools on state testing. We expected to be 2023 California Distinguished Schools like in 2019, and we're surprised that the state didn't grant us the award because of our COVID absences. My children were greatly affected by the rules that the state put in place during the pandemic. My children were forced to stay home because of exposure to COVID-positive person. My daughters had excused absences, all due to being in close contact with relatives who had COVID. Furthermore, they missed schoolwork, instruction, and their friends. Still, they both continue to have outstanding performance in their schoolwork, meeting and excelling at all grade level standards.
Thank you. Next caller, please state your name and affiliation for the record. You have 1 minute. Your time starts now.
Hello, my name is Jen Tackney, and I'm a parent at Patton Elementary School in the Garden Grove Unified School District. I wanted to voice my opposition to Patton being unfairly denied the 2023 California Distinguished School Award due solely to our COVID-19 absences. The state is giving out awards for schools with high academic performance, and we have that. We hit all of the marks. Our ELA and math score ranked very high, our English learner progress indicator is high, and our suspension rates are low. Despite the challenges of COVID-19, we worked hard, but we were denied the award due to COVID-19 absences, which were required by the state quarantine rules. My daughter had 20 excused absences during the 2021-22 school year due to COVID-related symptoms and being a close contact. Despite the missed day, we worked hard to coordinate missed work from the school and ensure that she did not fall behind in her schoolwork. We were so proud when she met and exceeded standards on the state SBAC test. In the end, we know our students are high achieving and we don't need the state to tell us so, but we certainly don't appreciate being excluded for something out of our control that you mandated. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, you are now live. Please start your public comment. Caller, you are now live. Please start your public comment. Next caller, you are now live. Please
Hi.
start your Hi. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Lisa Ichikawa, and I have two sons at Excelsior Elementary School in Garden Grove Unified School District. When I learned that our school did not receive the California Distinguished Schools Award because of COVID absences, I was appalled. Excelsior earned the California Distinguished School Award in 2020, and our test scores show that we should have earned it this year too. We didn't want our sons to miss so many days of schools, but we had to follow the state guidelines. Grant was sent home so many times for COVID-19 symptoms that he was classified as chronically absent. It turns out he had severe dust allergies. When Grant also tested positive for COVID-19, both of our sons had to stay home for the required 5 days and could not return until we had a negative test. Both boys had to stay home for additional days due to being close contacts. Their teachers did an amazing job to help them stay on track, and they continue to meet and exceed standards. The state should give the California Distinguished Schools to all deserving schools, but leave COVID-19 absences out of it. This does not discredit all that we have accomplished academically, and the state should know that. Thank you.
Next caller, you are now live. Please start your public comment.
Hi, I'm Javad Arain, a parent at Murdy Elementary School in the Garden Grove Unified School District, and I'm urging the state to reconsider Murdy Elementary for the California Distinguished School Award, since the school met all criteria for this except its chronic absenteeism data, which was due to COVID-19 absences. During the 2021-22 school year, my daughter contracted COVID-19, which necessitated her prolonged absence from school due to state-required quarantine protocols. Despite these circumstances, the school ensured that Sania was provided with appropriate remote learning opportunities to minimize the impact on her education. My daughter's absences were directly related to a medical situation beyond our control. The school should not be penalized for circumstances such as these, which are unforeseeable and unavoidable. Murdy Elementary School's rigorous academic programs, innovative teaching methods, and inclusive culture have significantly contributed to the development and success of its students. It should not be denied this award for following the state-mandated COVID protocols. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, you are now live. Please start your public comment.
Hello, my name is Allison Tong, and my daughter attends Barker Elementary School in the Garden Grove Unified School District. We recently learned that we were denied the California Distinguished Schools Award due to our COVID absences. This was not only extremely disappointing to our parents, but also to our staff who work hard to help students succeed. My daughter was a TK student last year. She has an IEP, and we all work really hard to ensure that she is continuing to achieve her new developmental milestones. In fact, she is meeting grade level standards and doing well this year as a first grader, especially since last year she suffered long COVID diagnosed by her doctor. Emma missed a lot of school last year, but that is because she had long COVID as well as other exposures. The state shouldn't punish schools for following state and county health requirements and for doing our part to slow the spread. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, you're now live. Please start your public comment.
Hello, my name is Dat Sweeney, and two of my children, Timothy and Elizabeth, attend Garden Park Elementary School in the Garden Grove Unified School District. We were really disappointed to learn that we were denied the California Distinguished Schools Award due to COVID absences. It seemed wrong to punish schools where families followed the rules during COVID. When COVID hit, it was hard on the entire family, and when my wife and I tested positive, our children were required to stay home for 13 days of school. It was impossible to isolate as we had to properly care for our children. Then when our children had COVID, they missed more days. So despite missing so much school, both Timothy and Elizabeth continued to maintain high academic performance. They both exceeded standards on all state tests and district benchmarks. As their father, I'm so proud of their endurance, perseverance, and determination to earn high academic marks during a very challenging time. The state should remove COVID absences from its formula for measuring academic success. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comment for item number 14.
Thank you very much. Of course, these are items that are not agendized that we hear about, but I do want to note that we are going to hear about the chronic absenteeism indicator in our July meeting, so we will be following up on some of the commentary that we've just heard. And with that, thank you. I hereby adjourn our May 2023 meeting at 10:42 a.m., and I look forward to seeing you in July.